Hello, I am the Angry Spork, taking issue with part 2 of the Golem of Gotham. In the last episode, some racist morons were causing trouble in a district largely populated by immigrants, so an old Jewish man created a golem, legendary protector of God's chosen people. He took out a couple of the perpetrators and then a couple of random people it envisioned as Nazis for some reason. Batman's investigation of the area has now brought him to the destructive creature, and so we continue with Detective Comics number 632. The cover, much like the previous one, is simple and fitting enough of the Dark Knight, this time perched upon a lamppost. Another indicator of a time when not every cover was a succinct version of the story or trying to grab your attention by claiming it changes everything for the 7th time this month. If I had to deal a criticism to either of these covers, it's that it doesn't indicate it's the Golem of Gotham story, so when I wanted to review it, it took me that much longer to find the proper issues. But it's a pretty weak criticism. The story continues with the Golem smacking bats around while the old man narrates aloud what he's done. We jump to him in his apartment complex where he's distraught over how his creature is so disobedient when he sees that underneath the stairs he's walking down is a large burlap bag. "You do this every year, Santa. Stop leaving off-season gag gifts. I'm not converting, for crying out loud." No, it's racist Peewit Steve, whom the old man recognizes from the cemetery. Apparently, after its first encounter with the Batman, the Golem caught up with Steve, though no explanation where he got the bag, and brought him here. The elderly sort of mystic thinks it was so he could personally hurt the kid to alleviate his survivor's guilt, not just of the Hindu temple torch last issue, but also of similar minds and their atrocities in Munich back in 1938. Steve's a little weirded out and takes his leave. Meanwhile, Batman has been tossed into an Indian restaurant. "There's blood in my mouth and curry sauce on my cape. I wish that were the other way around." Okay, Batman likes curry, that's fine, but whose blood do you want on your cape, Bruce? And how often do thoughts like these cross your mind? Re-engaging his opponent, he's perplexed by its speed and strength. It starts choking him, and Batman notices the sweetness of its breath, something which even he finds weird passing through his head at the moment. Now, if smelling its breath had something to do with making someone else bleed, that would have been a normal thought. All his physical attacks are doing all of nothing, and Batman notices a word he's never seen before on the Mudman's forehead. Emeth. When he utters it, the creature loosens his death grip, looks ashamed, and walks away. Bats takes a breather, knowing he'll recall where he knows that word from any moment now, after saying he'd never seen it before. Or maybe he'll just fall over. He leaves, telling the restaurant patrons to return to their meals. "And thanks for your help." I'm kind of unsure how to take this. While any of us would want some assistance from others if we were being attacked by a giant clay monster, this is the same cape-wearing vigilante that's known for telling other cape-wearing vigilantes that he doesn't need their help or to quit crime fighting in a city infested with crime because they're not trained or equipped enough for it. It's admittedly funny, but also feels a little mean-spirited. I mean, what did he expect people to do? They went there for dinner, not to rumble in the dirt, or with the dirt. He retreats to a rooftop, wondering why he's so sleepy, since it couldn't have been from just having been throttled. As he gets ready to lie down for a little bit, he suddenly remembers that Emeth is Hebrew for truth, and tells a non-present Alfred to wake him up at 6:30. Which, he just might. The guy's a really committed butler. Meanwhile, Steve frantically seeks out a payphone, as we get some odd narration captions. Odd in that it's done in the third person, as if from the author, rather than an alternative to inner monologue from a single character. Anyway, he calls up Frank, who's skeptical of his story of a monster, but will pick him up anyway with the rest of the crew. Batman's waking up a half hour later, which is too long for him. and he forces his body to get moving, remembering the old man he saw in the doorway where the Mudman's tracks were leading, recalling he heard the name Jacob. The Golem trashes a car with people in it, again envisioning Nazis, and we see at least one passenger moving. A cop tries confronting it as Steve and the remaining white supremacists break into the old man's home, with their leader Frank brushing the monster off as some guy in a costume, despite how it killed Joe last issue. So maybe we're up against a Jewish Schwarzenegger here.
Eat lead, Rabbi.
Sorry, that's not kosher.
Oh, Arnold doesn't have to be Jewish to whoop you. Speaking of, Arnold Schwarzenegger does indeed have a video talking about the Nazi philosophy, and regardless of your politics or ideologies, I strongly recommend giving it a watch. But first, back to the guy dressed as a bat.
Just as the cops discover how ineffective bullets are to the Golem, it starts to react to its creator being confronted by the hate group, who are forcing him at gunpoint to start spraying swastikas all over. On the very next page, Batman arrives too late. The thugs have already left, taking with them the old man, named Saul Zwemer, to the burned Hindu temple. Would have been nice to know his name sometime last issue, but there you are. Batman inspects the vandalized apartment, deducing that the goon squad forced their captive to mark his home, noticing the difference in technique to the vandalism of the graveyard. He sees a picture of Jacob, who looks a lot like the Golem, makes a connection there as well, and then focuses on the swastika.
Note to self, pour Wayne money into building Time Machine. Go back in time and punch Hitler. I don't care if Captain America did it first. Or over 200 times.
Saul is being interrogated about the guy in the monster suit, but while he is at first defiant, he recalls a memory of a similar situation, being grilled by Nazis under threat of pain to reveal where the resistance fighters are, specifically their leader. At the time, Saul was 22, feared for his life, and couldn't stand pain. As he did then, so does he presently give the name of Jacob Golem, and where to find his rebellion.
If at any point you thought this story was going to end up as Batman meets Fiddler on the Roof, here is proof that ain't gonna happen.
The old Golem Smith feels he's died over and over since his betrayal, the idea of the Golem growing in proportion to his shame. Speak of the clay devil, it's emerged from behind the Ganesha statue, and starts picking the creeps off, with its maker unwilling to put a stop to it.
Ava Nagila, baby.
The small band of small-mindedness is dwindling down to Steve, promising to release Saul if he calls his monster off before he ends the 18-year-old's life. Instead, the old man asks why he joined in on the terrorism. Turns out it was partly believing their culture was under attack, not that Steve actually noticed, of course, and partly because it was really fun. Sadly, this is an excuse used by real-life people for their own hate crimes. The Golem looms over Steve, who is swiftly lasted away by Batman. Thank God you... Shut up! You don't deserve saving.
It honestly did feel kind of weird for Bats to say that, since he's gone out of his way on so many occasions to save any given Arkham inmate from death. But maybe it's more like the titular villains from the animated series episode The Terrible Trio. At least someone like the Joker has madness for an excuse.
The Golem, apparently growing in size, grabs Batman by the foot, but is then kicked in the E of its forehead, which seems to daze it. The Dark Knight goes to free Saul, saying the swastika he was forced to paint were the Asian version, going clockwise, figuring it was a clue to the Hindu temple. Funny thing, and this is what sticks out the most for me since I read this story, it wasn't a clue at all. Saul painted the only version of the mark he could stomach, and the white supremacists were too dense to realize it. However, because the Golem has been denied for 50 years, it can't be stopped and is beyond forgiveness. So Batman lunges at it, so he can erase the first E, leaving only meth, which is Hebrew for death. Meth is death. There's an anti-drug PSA for you. Saul says it's a good idea, but will only work if the creator does it. His voice distracts the clay brute enough for Batman to recall the barest information on the Golem's story, like how that also included a man named Saul, and tie his foe to the Ganesha statue. Unfortunately, it ends up pulling the statue down, and the debris hits Pointy Ears in the head. Though dazed and looking rather sad, he returns to the old man.
Kill the golem, Saul. Please, erase the letter E.
Erase a letter? What would Sesame Street say? Seriously, though, when did Batman find out the guy's name? I guess it could have been when he was poking around his apartment, but we never see him make such a discovery. Either that, or he's counting on the guy being named Saul, just like in the story he remembered. Which would be weird, and a little bit racist.
But Saul's not cooperating. The creature is his long-hidden shame and anger, and even its sleep-inducing breath is indicative of the old man figuratively sleeping to the truth. Bit of a stretch, but hey, who am I to argue with the guy? Though he betrayed his friend Jacob to the Nazis, he's using the golem to finally fight back. And Bats, aching and battered, decides to skip nicer persuasions and use the expediency of intimidation. He mentioned how he's broken criminals and a man in his 70s wouldn't stand much of a chance, especially when it's clear he's afraid of pain. It works, and Saul wipes the first letter off the still-trapped golem, reducing it back to inanimate dirt. Bats doesn't wallow in comparing himself to the Nazis that previously threatened Saul, because even though there wasn't time to convince Saul another way, the Dark Knight admits he never would have physically hurt the man, and apologizes for the scare.
Batman apologizing for scaring someone? I think Saul deserves that on a plaque because no one is ever going to believe him.
The comic ends with Bats carrying the old man to get him to a hospital, leaving Steve hanging for the police.
Have fun.
But you're not even going to punch him? I was looking forward to Batman punching Nazis, and he's just going to leave the last one dangling there like a dust mite caught in a spider web. I guess if you want Nazis punched, you gotta do it yourself. Which seems to be a major theme in this story.
Seriously though, something like this has been fairly common in comics for a while, a serious social issue touched on while involving a popular hero. Though Bats doesn't actually fight the white supremacists like we'd have liked, I'm sure, it's skewed to the problem being handled by someone it directly affected. That, however, left a bunch of innocent people hurt or killed, so what takeaway can we get from this on how to deal with bigotry? I don't think it's eschewing self-defense or fighting back, but at the same time, letting your anger and your inner demons get out of control can have unforeseen consequences for innocent people.
The reason why the Golem was seeing random citizens as Nazis could have used more elaboration.
Between resembling his old friend Jacob and acting out based on the mental slips into the past, it seems like Saul shares some kind of mental link with the creature, but it's not really clarified. Is it something based on the original story of the Golem, or is it something the writer came up with, but spelling it out kind of slipped his mind? I suppose it could be argued that the sheer amount of shame and anger the Maker feels is supposed to explain why the Golem was so disobedient. Also, Batman realizes that the word emeth, for whatever reason, can make the creature stop his assault, but he only ever uses it once. He didn't think to use it the next time he found the thing. He even admitted to being scared of having to face it again, so what's the deal, Batsy?
I hope he knows that's not going to work on Clayface.
Though one thing that didn't need further elaboration was the white supremacists and their motivations. Sure, we could have been told that one of them was laid off, some black guy took his job, or that one of them was raised by an anti-Semite. But does any of that sound like a better reason than Steve's "it seemed like fun" excuse when they torch a temple with people inside? Fact is, this kind of hate is irrational and mentally debilitating. In some storytelling cases, delving into such a mind to better understand it might be compelling, but I think it works for this story that, pure and simple, these guys are just violent thugs who find it easier to blame and destroy than to get over themselves and build. They do hint that at least Steve was capable of being redeemed, but it doesn't go anywhere and screw him anyway.
Maybe They should have looked at the family of the Indian mother and child they murdered and said a half-hearted "my bad" and jumped into lava. That seems to be some people's idea of redemption.
The art is classic, though it may have had a coloring error or two, and the storytelling is pretty solid. I did think it was weird that a character that got killed got his own narration captions, when thought bubbles would have worked, but it's not a story breaker. I liked Batman's narration. It felt like the literary elements of the medium were being appropriately utilized to complement the graphic art rather than just tell us what we're already seeing. A really good balance between the two. And even though he did create a monster that killed some innocent people, I still felt really sorry for Saul. I mean, you really felt his pain when he was describing what happened to him. I thought it helped make the story a bit more thought-provoking, getting the reader to ask certain questions they might not have before, like, how far is too far even when dealing with scum like these guys?
Overall, the story isn't epic or earth-shattering, and there are a few missteps here and there, but it's still pretty good. The events, though, are sadly relevant today, give or take a magical clay monster. We've seen an unfortunate resurgence in hate group activity lately, and there's really no excuse for it. Even a comic from when I was not even 10 years old could easily convey on which side of right and wrong people like these are. And maybe it's better they didn't entertain the antagonists' reasons for their actions. The fact is, in real life, hate groups rationalize their actions any way they can, formulate any lie, and avoid all contrary evidence because they're more comfortable in their fantasy than in reality. Batman didn't get to punch any of them. I'm the angry spork, and man, have I got issues.
Dreidel, 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 I made you out of clay.